Elias Vance had never been particularly lucky, but he had always believed in small miracles. That night, however, luck seemed to have taken an extended vacation. The neutral trade station, Urindor Prime, was buzzing like a swarm of restless insects, each species jostling for attention, for goods, for influence. Humans were rare here and not in a celebrated way. To most of the galaxy, humans were fragile, unpredictable, and inconsequential. Elias, a courier of messages and minor diplomatic favors, had spent most of his life trying to prove otherwise. Tonight, though, he was just another lost human among thousands of alien faces. The station's central bar was loud, smelling of spices that burned and fermented drinks that smelled stronger than anything back on Earth. Elias slid onto a worn stool, rubbing at the back of his neck. He had just delivered a report to a minor alien governor, a report that, judging by the frown and the impatient tapping of his clawed fingers, had gone exactly as badly as he expected. He downed the amber liquid in front of him, wincing as it burned down his throat, wishing for the first time that humans had better tolerances for alien alcohol. "Rough night?" a soft voice asked, startling him. Elias turned to see her. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water. Her eyes were deep and golden, reflecting the lights of the bar in a way that made Elias feel like they were looking straight into his thoughts. She wore flowing clothes that seemed both ceremonial and casual, like she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. "I could say the same for you," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady, though he felt an unusual nervousness he couldn't explain. She smiled slightly, a small tilt of her head that suggested amusement and curiosity at the same time. "I am new here," she said, her voice melodic, but with a strange weight behind it, a subtle authority he couldn't place. Elias laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "So am I, in a way, though I've been stuck here longer than I'd like to admit. Humans aren't exactly treated like equals here. So you notice me, even in a room full of aliens who are bigger, brighter, and smarter than me," he said, trying to sound casual, though his heart was beating faster than it should have. She studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Sometimes the smallest things carry the most weight." Elias didn't know if it was the alcohol, the strange aura of the woman, or just exhaustion from his life, but he felt a pull toward her, a need to understand her, to connect. They talked for hours, not about politics, not about trade, but about the universe, about loneliness, about what it felt like to be trapped in a role that others expected you to play. The bar around them continued to roar with alien chatter, the smell of food and smoke and oil thick in the air, but for Elias, the world had narrowed down to this strange, shimmering woman. "I am called Saris," she finally said when he asked her name. "And you?" "Nothing is unimportant," she said simply. "Even humans, small and fragile as you may seem, carry weight the galaxy does not understand." And he realized, with an odd mixture of fear and exhilaration, that he wanted to stay with her as long as possible, if only to listen, to speak, to exist in the same space. Hours passed. Drinks came and went. Aliens laughed loudly, argued, or bickered over things that seemed trivial and meaningless. But for Elias and Saris, time moved differently. The world outside the bar seemed distant, irrelevant. Eventually, the bar thinned, the lights dimmed, the cleaners began their quiet work, and the noise of the station settled into a dull hum. Saris looked at Elias, her eyes catching the last lights of the bar. "You will not remember all of this tomorrow," she said softly, almost wistfully. "Why would I forget?" Elias asked, confused. "Because some nights are meant to exist in the present," she replied. "Some moments must be held lightly without being burdened by what comes next." For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere in the galaxy, not as a courier, not as a human dismissed by others, but as himself, with someone who understood him. The night passed in a blur, a tapestry of conversation, laughter, and quiet glances. Elias barely noticed when the stars outside shifted as the station rotated in orbit, nor when the first signs of dawn crept through the observation windows. It was only when he woke up that morning that reality shattered. He opened his eyes to find himself in a chamber he had never seen before. The walls glowed with a soft light that seemed alive, pulsing faintly. Massive windows revealed fleets of ships hovering in the void, their sleek hulls glinting in the light of distant stars. Alien guards, clad in armor that shimmered like liquid metal, stood at attention, and beside him was Saris. She was no longer the relaxed, enigmatic stranger from the bar. She stood tall, regal, and impossibly powerful. Every movement was precise, commanding, and yet she retained the grace and warmth that had drawn him to her the night before, Elias blinked. "W what, where?" he stammered. Saris looked at him, her golden eyes unreadable. "You are awake, good. This is the royal chamber. I am the queen of the Aurelian dominion." The night that had seemed small, personal, and fleeting had transformed into something monumental. He was not just beside an ordinary stranger. He had spent a night next to the most powerful being in the galaxy, and he had done so without realizing it. Panic rose in his chest. I didn't know." The woman before him was a queen, a ruler feared and respected across the stars, yet she had shared herself with him as an equal. He had no idea how to respond. The chamber was silent except for the hum of distant engines and the quiet shuffle of the guards. Elias took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He realized that whatever had happened that night was bigger than he could comprehend, bigger than any human experience he had ever known. "And now?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Saris's gaze softened. "Now you understand that the galaxy is not as simple as it seems. Power, fear, diplomacy, they are all tools. But sometimes, even the smallest being can make a difference." The hum of the station, the distant chatter, and the flashing lights of distant stars felt different now. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and beautiful, and for the first time Elias felt like he might be a part of it. And beside him, the queen of the Aurelian dominion, Saris, watched him, not with suspicion or judgment, but with curiosity and perhaps a spark of hope. For the first time in centuries, she had a companion. And for the first time, Elias understood that a single night could indeed change everything. Elias had barely caught his breath when the doors of the royal chamber slid open. Dozens of Aurelian guards stood silently, their movements precise, their eyes alert. Some were massive, horned beings from the outer systems, others were slender and elegant, their forms almost liquid in their motion. Each of them exuded the same presence, disciplined, powerful, unwavering. And yet they all looked at Elias with a strange mix of suspicion and awe. Sarah stepped forward, her figure radiant, casting an almost ethereal glow across the room. "You are safe," she said. "No one here will harm you without my command. Humans are unpredictable. They are often dismissed or underestimated, and yet here you are beside me. And sometimes that is more dangerous and more valuable than any weapon, any fleet, any crown." Their eyes were sharp, calculating, and filled with suspicion. The leader, a tall being with silver skin and multiple eyes, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "forgive our intrusion, but we must speak regarding this anomaly. He is my companion, and he is protected under my command. Humans are not controlled like other species. He could manipulate your Majesty, undermine the Dominion, or even threaten stability itself." "Enough," she said firmly. Her voice carried the weight of command, a sound that made even the most seasoned counselors pause. "He is human. He has not acted against me. He is not a threat, and I will not tolerate anyone treating him as such." Elias' heart pounded. He had never felt more out of place, and yet strangely more significant. After the council left, Saris turned to him. "You must understand," she said softly, "that this is not a normal situation. Most humans are ignored, dismissed, or underestimated, but some things about humans are unique. Your species is resistant to certain forms of control. You are not easily dominated, not easily bent to fear or psychic influence. That is why I spent the night with you, to experience freedom, truly, entirely freedom. I am free in title, yes, but I have never known true freedom in centuries. My life is dictated by duty, by expectation, by fear. No one dares to speak honestly to me. No one dares to exist beside me as an equal, until you." The woman who had shared laughter, stories, and quiet moments with him was a ruler feared by the galaxy, and she had chosen to treat him as an equal, if only for a single night. He wanted to speak, to say something profound, but the words refused to come. Instead, the silence between them was filled with understanding. For the first time, both of them existed not as queen and subject, but as two beings sharing a moment beyond expectation. Later that day, Elias was given a guided tour of the palace, or at least the portion he was allowed to see. He marveled at the technology, the art, and the sheer scale of the Aurelian Dominion's wealth. Massive observation decks offered views of fleets in orbit, worlds spinning in synchronized harmony, and distant stars twinkling like scattered diamonds. Yet despite all this, Elias could not shake a feeling of fragility. The galaxy was vast, powerful, and intimidating, and here he was, a single human caught in its center. As they walked, Saris spoke of the Dominion, not in the language of rulers, but in the language of someone who bore the weight of responsibility. She spoke of conflicts resolved through fear, of rebellion crushed before it could grow, of alliances maintained through calculated dominance. And through it all, Elias could sense a deep loneliness that mirrored his own. "I have ruled for centuries," Sarah said quietly, "and yet I have never known companionship, not truly, not without caution, without expectation, without strategy. That is why you are here, Elias. You remind me that there is another way to exist, that there is value in trust, in understanding, in connection without fear." The day passed in a blur of introductions and guarded conversations. Elias met advisors, generals, and scholars, each of them polite but wary. They treated him with a mixture of curiosity and caution, their eyes constantly flicking toward Saris as if questioning why she allowed him near. It was clear that the galaxy itself had never seen a human treated as an equal in such a context. When night fell again, the chamber was quiet. The fleets outside glowed softly against the void of space, casting shimmering reflections across the walls. Saris stood near the window, looking out into the galaxy she had ruled for so long. Elias approached cautiously. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Being everything to everyone." He had spent one night beside a stranger and now walked the corridors of a queen's palace. The galaxy's expectations weighed upon them both, yet in this moment there was a rare sense of balance. "Humans are small," Elias said almost to himself, "but we survive, we adapt, we endure. Maybe that's why you chose me. And maybe that is why humans are more important than most beings believe. You remind me that power is not only in strength or fear. It is in resilience, in understanding, in courage." He was not a ruler, but as long as he remained human, he carried a strength that no fleet, no crown, no psychic influence could ever match. The next morning, the Aurelian High Council convened once more. This time, rumors had spread. A human was at the side of the queen. Some whispered that Elias had manipulated her, others that he had been gifted extraordinary influence through some unknown human ability. Saris entered the council chamber with Elias following at her side. The room fell into stunned silence. "Counselors," Saris began, her voice steady, commanding, "you have questions. You fear what you do not understand. This human is not your enemy. He is protected. He is my companion, and his presence is not a threat but a reminder. Even the smallest beings can carry immense value." He did not know what the future held, but he knew that humanity had found a foothold in the galaxy, and he, somehow, was at the center of it. Later, as he walked through the palace gardens with Saris, watching alien flora glow under artificial light, he realized that his life had changed irrevocably. Humanity, once dismissed and ignored, now had a connection to one of the most powerful beings in existence. And perhaps, just perhaps, that connection would reshape the galaxy itself. For the first time, Elias understood that a single night, a single choice, and a single human could alter the course of history. And as he glanced at Saris, the queen who had shared that night with him, he knew that the galaxy was no longer a distant, untouchable place. It was a realm in which even humans could leave their mark. And in that quiet moment, with the stars reflecting in her eyes, Elias realized that the most extraordinary journey of his life was only just beginning. The days that followed were unlike anything Elias had ever experienced. The Aurelian Dominion's palace was alive with activity, yet beneath the glittering surfaces and disciplined order lay an undercurrent of tension that pressed down on him like the weight of 1,000 stars. Everywhere he went, whispers followed. Guards stopped mid-step to glance at him. Advisors spoke in low tones, casting wary glances at the queen. Even in the vast halls of the palace, Elias felt conspicuously small, a human out of place, yet impossible to ignore. Saris remained beside him as much as she could, a silent guardian and guide. She seemed to understand the pressure that surrounded him, though she bore it herself in ways that Elias could not begin to imagine. Her golden eyes often met his with quiet reassurance, a silent reminder that he was safe, that he mattered, that his presence, small as he felt, was meaningful. "You must learn to walk among them carefully," she said one evening as they moved through the observation deck overlooking a fleet of warships. "The High Council watches closely. They do not understand humans and they do not trust them. Some may see you as a threat, others as a tool. Both are dangerous. Humans have a resilience that other species cannot match. You are adaptable. You survive without relying on fear, without wielding psychic power or intimidation. You remind me, and the galaxy of something long forgotten. That strength does not always come from dominance. For the first time, he understood the vastness of her responsibility, the impossible expectations she carried. And yet, she had chosen to trust him, to allow him to exist beside her not as a subordinate, not as a subject, but as an equal in at least one way. It was during one council meeting that the tension he had felt so far erupted into something undeniable. The council convened in the grand chamber, its walls adorned with banners representing countless conquered systems. Elias stood beside Saris as she entered, and immediately the room went silent. Whispers rippled across the councilors like a faint wind before a storm. One of the councilors, a towering figure named Tharian with metallic silver skin and 6 eyes that scanned the room independently, stepped forward. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like a blade hidden behind silk. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing just enough to show respect while maintaining authority, "this human at your side is concerning. Humans are not controlled like other species. They cannot be compelled, and their emotions can be unpredictable. He may influence your Majesty in ways we cannot foresee. He may destabilize the Dominion." Saris's gaze swept over the council, sharp and unyielding. "Elias is my companion," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber with the quiet power of command. "He is not a threat, and I will not tolerate anyone treating him as one. With respect, your Majesty, the galaxy has seen humans before. They are fragile. They are weak. How can one such as he accompany you safely?" He could either shrink into insignificance, or he could show the council why humans mattered. He straightened his back and spoke, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I am not fragile," he said simply. "I am human. I survive where others might fail. I endure where others might crumble. I do not rule fleets, and I do not command armies, but I understand people, and I understand choices. I do not threaten the Dominion. I strengthen it by reminding those who lead that fear is not the only path." Saris's expression softened slightly, a silent acknowledgement that Elias had found his voice when it mattered most. Tharian's lips pressed into a thin line, but he did not speak further. The meeting continued, but the tension had shifted. Whispers still lingered, but there was now a note of curiosity among the councilors. Who was this human who spoke with such calm certainty beside the Queen of the Aurelian Dominion? Outside the council chamber, the galaxy reacted as rumors spread. News of a human at the side of the most powerful queen traveled faster than light through trade networks and communication channels. Merchants speculated, diplomats fretted, and soldiers whispered among themselves. To most of the galaxy, it was unthinkable. A species dismissed as weak, insignificant, and frail was suddenly entwined with power beyond comprehension. Elias could sense the fear and curiosity, even from within the palace walls. Yet he also felt something else, a growing recognition of what humans could offer. They had survived, adapted, and thrived against impossible odds, and perhaps that was exactly why Saris had chosen to trust him. He was living proof that resilience and courage could not be measured in fleets or psychic powers. The days stretched on, each one filled with challenges. Elias learned the protocols, the subtle gestures, the unspoken rules of the court. He endured alien scrutiny, often in silence, letting his actions, small as they were, speak louder than words. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he intervened. And slowly the council began to notice that the human beside the queen was not dangerous, not manipulative, not weak. He was steady, thoughtful, and unflinching. Saris, meanwhile, watched him with a mixture of pride and relief. Elias had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten: the value of trust, the power of companionship, the quiet strength that could emerge when fear and dominance were set aside. She began to rely on his perspective, seeking his opinion not because it was required, but because it mattered. It was during a late evening stroll through the palace gardens that Elias began to fully understand the scope of his place in the galaxy. The gardens were vast, with alien flora that glowed softly in the artificial light, streams of liquid crystal flowing alongside paths of polished stone. The air smelled faintly of spices and metals, a scent entirely alien yet somehow comforting. Saris walked beside him silently for a long while, her gaze lost in the distance. Finally, she spoke. "Elias, the High Council fears humans because they cannot dominate them. Most species can be controlled through fear, through psychic influence, through the weight of expectation. Humans cannot. That is why you are so important, even if you do not realize it. You remind me, and the galaxy, that influence does not always come from fear. It can come from understanding, from connection, from courage. And perhaps that was the very reason he had been brought here, not by chance, not by luck, but by purpose. As the days turned into weeks, the council's skepticism began to shift into cautious respect. They still did not fully understand humans, and many still whispered behind closed doors. But Elia's presence was no longer seen solely as a risk. It was also a reminder that even the smallest, most underestimated beings could carry weight in a galaxy built on power and fear. And then, the first real test came. Reports arrived of a rebellion brewing on a distant world, a revolt led by a faction that sought to challenge the Dominion's authority. The Council was quick to suggest a brutal response, fleets mobilized to strike without hesitation. But Saris hesitated, turning to Elias for counsel. "What should we do?" she asked quietly, almost vulnerably. Elias took a deep breath, recalling the countless human histories of survival and negotiation. "Sometimes fighting isn't the only answer," he said slowly. "We can offer understanding, solutions, alliances. If we act with thought, we may turn enemies into allies. We may save lives without losing control." Instead, she listened, truly listened, to the perspective of a human, a being she had never expected to guide her choices. The rebellion, when approached with strategy and communication, yielded far better results than any fleet could have achieved. The leaders surrendered without bloodshed, convinced not by fear, but by respect and understanding. Elias had shown that humanity's strength was not in weapons or domination, but in resilience, courage, and empathy. By the time the conflict ended, Elias had begun to realize something extraordinary. He was no longer just a human in the palace. He was a symbol of what humans could accomplish, even in a galaxy that dismissed them as weak. And beside him, Saris, the most powerful queen in existence, was learning to trust, to consider, and to act not only as a ruler but as a leader who could see beyond fear. That night, as they stood together on the observation deck, watching distant stars glimmer across the void, Elias understood the truth. Humanity had a role to play in shaping the galaxy. They were not conquerors, nor were they tools. They were survivors, adapters, connectors, and their greatest power lay not in dominance, but in being human. And in that quiet moment, with the galaxy sprawling endlessly around them, Elias felt the stirrings of something that had never touched him before: hope. Not just for himself, but for humanity, for Saris, and for a galaxy that might one day see the true strength of the smallest beings. The first warnings came quietly, carried on encrypted messages that blinked across the palace's communication array. Elias, who had begun to adjust to the palace routines, noticed the change immediately. Ships were moving in unusual formations. Sensors detected strange energy signatures along the outer systems. Whispers of rebellion were no longer just rumors. They were becoming reality. Saris received the reports with her usual calm, but Elias could see the tension in the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the flicker of gold in her eyes. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she walked to the observation deck, looking out at the countless stars that marked her dominion. Elias followed, sensing that this was another moment where his humanity could make a difference. "The High Council will demand action," she said quietly, her voice carrying both authority and fatigue. "They will want fleets to strike first, to crush any threat before it grows. That has always been the way, but—" She trailed off, and Elias waited. "But what?" he asked. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I do not wish to act without understanding the root of this rebellion. Too many lives are at stake. And yet, to hesitate is to risk appearing weak. Sometimes the strongest position comes not from fear, but from understanding." The council convened immediately. The chamber filled with the same intimidating presence as before, advisors, generals, strategists, all questioning the wisdom of any delay. Tharian, still wary of Elias, spoke first. "Your Majesty, hesitation will embolden the rebels. If we do not act decisively, they may gain strength. I urge immediate mobilization of the fleets." "We can send envoys," he said carefully. "Offer terms, listen to what the rebels truly want. Many may be acting out of fear, misunderstanding, or desperation. If we approach with strategy and communication, we might resolve this without bloodshed. And if diplomacy fails, we are ready to defend ourselves." Some counselors frowned, some exchanged wary glances, and some appeared thoughtful. Saris nodded slightly, a silent approval that gave Elias a small surge of confidence. Preparations began immediately. Fleets were mobilized, weapons readied, yet envoys were dispatched with messages of peace and offers of negotiation. Ilias found himself accompanying the envoys, not as a ruler, not as a diplomat, but as a human voice, a reminder that understanding could exist even in the shadow of overwhelming power. The journey to the rebel world was tense. Ilias had never traveled so far from Earth, never navigated so many star systems in such a short time. Yet the vastness of space, instead of intimidating him, inspired him. Humans were small in the galaxy, yes, but they endured, they adapted, they survived. And perhaps that simple truth could resonate even with beings who had never known humanity. When they arrived, the rebel leaders were cautious, suspicious, and visibly tense. Ships hovered above the planet, armed and ready, yet the envoys came not with threats but with words. Ilias stepped forward, standing beside the Aurelian envoy and Ceres's message, and spoke clearly. "We come not to conquer, not to destroy," he said. "We come to understand. We know fear has led you here, and we know your actions have consequences, but there is another way." The Aurelian queen does not wish to rule through fear alone. She is willing to listen, to negotiate, to find solutions that respect life and choice. "Why should we trust you?" For hours they argued, debated, and presented grievances. Ilias listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words were calm, clear, and grounded in humanity's resilience. Slowly, the rebel leaders began to see that the fleets above them, while ready for destruction, were not there to annihilate. They were there because of trust, not intimidation. By the next morning, the rebellion had ended not in bloodshed, but in agreement. Territories were returned to the Dominion, leaders were integrated into governance, and resources were shared fairly. The galaxy's hierarchy remained, but for the first time, it was clear that power need not be absolute to be effective. The human beside the queen had reminded everyone that diplomacy, empathy, and understanding could achieve what weapons could not. News of the resolution spread quickly. The High Council returned to the palace with cautious respect, some grudgingly admitting that Ilias' council had prevented a war that could have cost thousands of lives. Tharion, still skeptical but slightly softened, remarked quietly to Ceres, "You're human, he may not be what I expected. He has value, though I cannot yet understand it fully." He had arrived as a courier, a human overlooked and underestimated. Now he stood beside one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, guiding choices that affected thousands of worlds. And yet he remained, at his core, human, not a warrior, not a ruler, but a survivor, a thinker, a connector. That night, as he walked through the palace gardens with Ceres, the weight of events pressed upon him. The stars stretched endlessly above, and the soft glow of alien flora lit their path. Ceres spoke softly, almost as if to herself. "Humans are remarkable," she said. "They carry a strength that cannot be measured by fleets or psychic power. They endure, adapt, and inspire. And maybe that's enough to change the galaxy. And there is hope in humanity." And beside him, Ceres, the queen of the Aurelian Dominion, was learning to trust in something beyond fear and control. A reminder that connection, understanding, and courage were as powerful as any fleet. As they stood together under the alien stars, Ilias realized that the galaxy was changing. Not because of fleets or weapons, but because of a human's presence, a simple voice, and the courage to act with clarity, empathy, and understanding. The rebellion had been resolved, but the true journey, the journey of humanity proving its place in the galaxy, was only beginning. And in that quiet moment, with the stars reflecting in Ceres's eyes, Ilias felt something he had never felt before, belonging. Not just beside a queen, not just in the palace, but in the galaxy itself. Humanity, underestimated and dismissed for so long, had begun to leave its mark, and the galaxy would never be the same. The weeks after the rebellion had changed everything. Ilias had settled into a rhythm he had never imagined possible. He was no longer just a courier or an observer. He had become a trusted advisor of sorts, though he never claimed the title. He walked the palace halls with a quiet confidence, aware that his presence carried meaning far beyond what he could fully comprehend. The galaxy was watching, and the small human who had once felt insignificant now held the attention of millions. Despite the calm, tension simmered beneath the surface. Not everyone had accepted the resolution of the rebellion. Some counselors remained suspicious, some generals muttered about human unpredictability, and some factions beyond the Dominion quietly plotted. Ilias knew that trust had limits, and that fear and ambition were constant forces in the galaxy. But he also knew that humanity's strength was not in domination, It was in resilience, understanding, and courage. One evening, Ceres summoned him to the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly, each a point of light in a galaxy teeming with life, power, and potential conflict. Fleets moved in careful formation, ensuring security without threatening the worlds below. Ceres's golden eyes reflected the constellations, and for a moment she seemed less a queen and more a companion, sharing the quiet weight of responsibility with him. "There is unrest again," she said quietly, her voice steady yet tinged with concern. "A faction beyond our borders has refused to recognize the new alliances. They are mobilizing. They may test the Dominion's resolve, and by extension, the galaxy's willingness to change. Not with weapons, but with words, with reasoning, with understanding. Humans survive by adapting. We survive by connecting. Perhaps that is the way to prevent bloodshed." Instead, they positioned themselves to offer protection while envoys, including Ilias, traveled to the rebel world. It was the same method that had worked before, but now the stakes were higher. This time, failure could mean war on a scale far beyond anything the galaxy had seen in decades. When they arrived, the rebel leaders were waiting, surrounded by their advisors and small fleets. The tension was palpable, a mixture of fear and suspicion. Yet Ilias stepped forward, his presence calm and steady. He did not wave weapons or demand submission, he simply spoke. "We come not to destroy," he said. "We come not to conquer, we come to understand. The Aurelian Dominion, led by the Queen, has offered terms that respect life and choice. Violence is not inevitable. You can join willingly, or you can face the consequences. But understand that the path of understanding is always stronger than the path of fear. Your weapons can destroy us in moments. Why should we believe words over power? And if you choose to listen, you may save lives that would otherwise be lost." It could also be measured in clarity, courage, and compassion. After hours of debate, negotiation, and careful discussion, the rebel leaders agreed to terms. Territories would remain under Dominion protection, resources would be shared, and leadership would include local input. Most importantly, they recognized the value of choice over domination, the power of trust over fear. For the first time, a potential war that could have engulfed thousands of systems ended with understanding and compromise. Ilias had not wielded a weapon, nor had he commanded armies, yet his actions had changed the course of history. Humans had reminded the galaxy of a truth that others often overlooked. Resilience, courage, and understanding were just as powerful as fleets and psychic dominance. When the envoys returned, the High Council convened once more. There was a mixture of relief, skepticism, and admiration in the room. Tharian, who had been one of the most vocal critics, approached Ceres quietly. "Your Majesty, the human beside you, he is not what I expected. He has value, though I cannot fully explain it. That there is strength in connection, courage, and choice. You have done what few could, remind me of hope. And through those qualities, they could reshape even the galaxy's course." The palace returned to a cautious peace. The fleets remained vigilant, but there was a sense of optimism that had not been felt in decades. Worlds began to rebuild, alliances were strengthened, and trade resumed under the principles of mutual respect and cooperation. Humanity, once ignored, had begun to take its place not as conquerors, but as connectors, problem-solvers, and survivors. One quiet evening, Ceres called Ilias to the highest tower of the palace. The stars stretched endlessly above, each one a world full of life and possibility. She stood beside him, her golden eyes reflecting constellations, her posture regal yet relaxed. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said softly. "Not by power, not by domination, but by being human. You have reminded me, and the galaxy, of something essential, that true strength lies not in fear, but in courage, in understanding, and in connection. Perhaps that is enough to change the galaxy. You have reminded me of hope, and that is more powerful than any fleet or weapon." And beside her, Ilias, small and human, realized that his place in the galaxy was not as a conqueror, but as a reminder of humanity's quiet, enduring power. The months that followed were marked by change. The Aurelian Dominion reformed its governance, incorporating representatives from various worlds, including humans. Decisions were debated, negotiated, and made with a sense of fairness that had been absent for centuries. Humans were no longer dismissed as weak or insignificant. They became valued for their adaptability, insight, and courage, the very qualities that had allowed Ilias to influence the course of events. Ilias himself did not seek titles, riches, or fame. He returned to his work as a courier and advisor, but his presence now carried weight. Leaders from countless worlds sought his counsel, not because he commanded armies, but because he represented something far more powerful: the human ability to endure, to adapt, and to act with clarity and courage. And Ceres, she was changed as well. No longer ruled solely by fear, she began to lead with wisdom tempered by empathy. She trusted humans, trusted her people, and trusted the small voice of courage and reason that had reminded her of what leadership could truly mean. One evening, Elias walked through the palace gardens, where alien plants glowed softly under the artificial moonlight. Ceres joined him, their steps in silence, yet their presence together spoke volumes. The galaxy had changed, not through domination or fear, but through understanding, courage, and human resilience. "You have left your mark," Ceres said quietly. "Not just on me, but on the galaxy. Humanity will never be ignored again. We adapt, we endure, and we try to do what's right. That is our power." And he, a single human, had helped pave the way. The galaxy, vast and endless, would never be the same. And for the first time, Elias felt a deep and abiding peace. Not because the galaxy was safe, not because power had been secured, but because humanity had reminded even the most powerful being in existence what it meant to endure, to adapt, and to hope. And in that quiet moment, as stars glittered above and alien winds whispered through the palace towers, Elias knew the truth. Even the smallest beings, the humans of Earth, could change the universe. One act of courage, one word of understanding, one night of connection at a time. The journey had begun with a single night, and it would continue for generations.